Welcome to the Spitzen-Körper Thelema. We are looking today at Helena Petrovna Blavatsky's The Key to Theosophy published in 1889, a text that sits at the crossroads of 19th century occult revival, comparative religion, and the attempt to systematize what Blavatsky called the wisdom religion. The excerpt before us is drawn from the dialogic core of the work, where Blavatsky, through her unnamed interlocutor and respondent Theto, constructs a genealogy of esoteric teaching that runs from Amonis Sakas and the Neoplatonists of Alexandria backward to Pythagoras, Buddha, and the Egyptian priesthoods, and forward to the modern Theosophical Society. This is not incidental history. The entire argument of her text depends on establishing that what modern Theosophists claim to teach is not a new invention, but the recovery and continuation of a perennial doctrine, one that has been deliberately hidden, passed mouth to mouth and initiate to initiate, for millennia. She is writing, in effect, a defense against the charge of charlatanry through an act of genealogical archaeology. The source tradition is the syncretistic Neoplatonism of late antiquity and its claimed and broken transmission through Eastern esoteric schools, a lineage that Blavatsky weaponizes against Victorian materialism and institutional Christianity alike. The historical moment is crucial. By 1889, Blavatsky had already founded the Theosophical Society in New York in 1875, had been accused of fraud in the Society for Psychical Research report of 1884, and was working from exile in Europe to defend her movement's legitimacy. The Key to Theosophy is partly defensive, partly proselytic, a handbook meant to inoculate believers against skepticism by grounding modern theosophy in respectable historical and philosophical sources. It belongs to a current of thought that runs through German idealism, romanticism, and comparative mythology. The notion that beneath the surface religions of the world lies a single esoteric truth, corrupted and fragmented by institutional religion, but recoverable through initiatic study. This current had been developing since the 18th century revival of Hermeticism and Swedenborgianism. Blavatsky inherits it, synthesizes it with Hindu and Buddhist philosophy she encountered during years in India, and attempts to systematize it for a mass-educated audience. What makes this passage remarkable is not its originality but its method, the construction of an unbroken chain of transmission. Blavatsky does not argue that theosophy is true because it works or because she has experienced it. She argues it is credible because Amonis taught it, because Plotinus taught it, because it exists in the mysteries of Eleusis and Samothrace, because Buddha taught it, because Christ taught it in parables. The argument is one of pedigree. And the pedigree is established through a careful distinction between exoteric teaching, what the masses received, and esoteric teaching, what the initiates knew. This is her crucial move. He adopted the doctrines which were received in Egypt. The esoteric were those of India concerning the universe and the deity, considered as constituting one great whole, concerning the eternity of the world, and established a system of moral discipline which allowed the people in general to live according to the laws of their country and the dictates of nature, but required the wise to exalt their mind by contemplation. An almost countless number of well-known writers testify to this. Mosheim says that Amonis taught that the religion of the multitude went hand in hand with philosophy, and with her had shared the fate of being by degrees corrupted and obscured with mere human conceits, superstitions and lies, and it ought therefore to be brought back to its original purity, by purging it of this dross and expounding it upon philosophical principles. And the whole Christ had in view was to reinstate and restore to its primitive integrity the wisdom of the ancients, to reduce within bounds the universally prevailing dominion of superstition, and in part to correct, and in part to exterminate, the various errors that had found their way into the different popular religions. This again is precisely what the modern theosophists say, only while the great Philolephian was supported and helped in the policy he pursued by the church fathers, Clement and Athenagoras, by the learned rabbis of the synagogue, by the philosophers of the academy and the grove, and while he taught a common doctrine for all, we, his followers on the same line, receive no recognition but, on the contrary, are abused and persecuted. People 1500 years ago are thus shown to have been more tolerant than they are in this enlightened century. Was Amonis encouraged and supported by the Church because, notwithstanding his heresies, he taught Christianity and was a Christian? Not at all. He was born a Christian, but never accepted church Christianity. As said of him by Dr. Wilder, he had but to propound his instructions according to the ancient pillars of Hermes, which Plato and Pythagoras knew before, and from them constituted their philosophy. Finding the same in the prologue of the Gospel according to John, he very properly supposed that the purpose of Jesus was to restore the great doctrine of wisdom in its primitive integrity. The narratives of the Bible and the stories of the gods he considered to be allegories illustrative of the truth, or else fables to be rejected. Moreover, as says the Edinburgh Encyclopedia, he acknowledged that Jesus Christ was an excellent man and the friend of God, but alleged that it was not his design entirely to abolish the worship of demons, and that his only intention was to purify the ancient religion. Since Amonis never committed anything to writing, how can one feel sure that such were his teachings? Neither did Buddha, Pythagoras, Confucius, Orpheus, Socrates, nor even Jesus, leave behind them any writings. Yet most of these are historical personages and their teachings have all survived. The disciples of Amonis, among whom are Origen and Hieronymus, wrote treatises and explained his ethics. Certainly the latter are as historical, if not more so, than the apostolic writings. Moreover, his pupils Origen, Plotinus and Longinus, counselor of the famous Queen Zenobia, have all left voluminous records of the Philolephian system so far, at all events, as their public profession of faith was known, for the school was divided into exoteric and esoteric teachings. How have the latter tenets reached our day? Since you hold that what is properly called the wisdom religion was esoteric. The wisdom religion was ever one and the same, and being the last word of possible human knowledge, was therefore carefully preserved. It preceded by long ages the Alexandrian theosophists, reached the modern, and will survive every other religion and philosophy. Where and by whom was it so preserved? Among initiates of every country, among profound seekers after truth their disciples, and in those parts of the world where such topics have always been most valued and pursued in India, Central Asia and Persia. Can you give me some proofs of its esotericism? The best proof you can have of the fact is that every ancient religious, or rather philosophical, cult consisted of an esoteric or secret teaching, and an exoteric or outward public worship. Furthermore, it is a well-known fact that the mysteries of the ancients comprised with every nation the greater, secret, and lesser, public mysteries as, for instance, in the celebrated solemnities called the Eleusinia, in Greece, from the hierophants of Samothrace, Egypt, and the initiated Brahmins of the India of old, down to the later Hebrew rabbis, all, for fear of profanation, kept their real bona fide beliefs secret. The Jewish rabbis called their secular religious series the Merkava, or exterior body, the vehicle, or covering which contains the hidden soul of their highest secret knowledge. The priests of the ancient nations never imparted their real philosophical secrets to the masses. They allotted to the latter only the husks. Northern Buddhism has its greater and its lesser vehicle, known as the Mahayana, the esoteric, and the Hinayana, the exoteric, schools. Nor can you blame them for such secrecy, for surely you would not think of feeding your flock of sheep on learned dissertations on botany instead of on grass. Pythagoras called his gnosis the knowledge of things that are, and preserved that knowledge for his pledged disciples only for those who could digest such mental food and feel satisfied, whom he pledged to silence and secrecy. Occult alphabets and secret ciphers are the development of the old Egyptian hieratic writings, the secret of which was, in the days of old, in the possession only of the hierogrammatists, or initiated Egyptian priests. Amonis Sakas, as his biographers tell us, bound his pupils by oath not to divulge his higher doctrines except to those who had already been instructed in preliminary knowledge, and who were also bound by a pledge. Finally, do we not find the same also in early Christianity, among the Gnostics, and even in the teachings of Christ? Did he not speak to the multitudes in parables which had a twofold meaning, and explain his reasons only to his disciples? Unto you, he says, it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables. And the author of New Platonism tells us that the Essenes of Judea and Carmel made similar distinctions, dividing their adherents into neophytes, brethren, and the perfect. Can you attain the secret wisdom simply by study? Encyclopedias define theosophy as supposed intercourse with God and superior spirits, and consequent attainment of superhuman knowledge by physical or chemical processes. Is this so? I think not. Nor is there any lexicographer capable of explaining, whether to himself or others, how superhuman knowledge can be attained by physical or chemical processes. Had Webster said by metaphysical and alchemical processes, the definition would be approximately correct. As it is absurd. Ancient theosophists claimed, and so do the modern, that the infinite cannot be known by the finite, that is, sensed by the finite self, but that the divine essence could be communicated to the higher spiritual self in a state of ecstasy. This condition can hardly be attained, like hypnotism, by physical and chemical processes. Real ecstasy was defined by Plotinus as the liberation of the mind from its finite consciousness, becoming one and identified with the infinite. This is the highest condition, says Dr. A. Wilder, but not one of permanent duration, and it is reached only by the very, very few. It is, indeed, identical with that state which is known in India as samadhi. The latter is practiced by the yogis, who facilitate it physically by the greatest abstinence in food and drink, and mentally by an incessant endeavor to purify and elevate the mind. Meditation is silent and unuttered prayer, or, as Plato expressed it, the ardent turning of the soul toward God, not to ask any particular good, but for good itself, for the universal supreme good of which we are a part on earth, and out of the essence of which we have all emerged. Therefore remain silent in the presence of the divine ones, till they remove the clouds from thy eyes and enable thee to see, by the light which issues from themselves, not what appears as good to thee, but what is intrinsically good. The soul is the camera in which facts and events, future, past, and present, are alike fixed, and the mind becomes conscious of them. Beyond our everyday world of limits, all is one day or state, the past and future comprised in the present. Then the soul is freed from the constraint of the body, and its nobler part is united to higher nature and becomes partaker in the wisdom and foreknowledge of the higher beings. Real theosophy is, for the mystics, that state which Apollonius of Tyana was made to describe thus: I can see the present and the future as in a clear mirror. The sage need not wait for the vapors of the earth and the corruption of the air to foresee events. The Dioi, or gods, see the future; common men, the present; sages, that which is about to take place. The theosophy of the sages is well expressed in the assertion, the kingdom of God is within us. Theosophy, then, is not, as held by some, a newly devised scheme. Only ignorant people can thus refer to it. It is as old as the world, in its teachings and ethics, if not in name, as it is also the broadest and most Catholic system among all. How comes it, then, that theosophy has remained so unknown to the nations of the Western Hemisphere? Why should it have been a sealed book to races confessedly the most cultured and advanced? We believe there were nations as cultured in days of old, and certainly more spiritually advanced, than we are. But there are several reasons for this willing ignorance. One of them was given by St. Paul to the cultured Athenians: a loss, for long centuries, of real spiritual insight, and even interest, owing to their too great devotion to things of sense and their long slavery to the dead letter of dogma and ritualism. But the strongest reason for it lies in the fact that real theosophy has ever been kept secret. You have brought forward proofs that such secrecy has existed, but what was the real cause for it? The causes for it were, firstly, the perversity of average human nature, and its selfishness, always tending to the gratification of personal desires to the detriment of neighbors and next of kin. Such people could never be entrusted with divine secrets. Secondly, their unreliability to keep the sacred and divine knowledge from desecration. It is the latter which led to the perversion of the most sublime truths and symbols, and to the gradual transformation of things spiritual into anthropomorphic, concrete and gross imagery. In other words, to the dwarfing of the God idea and to idolatry. What Blavatsky has constructed here is not a historical argument but a protective system. The claim is deceptively simple. All genuine religion and philosophy contains within itself an esoteric core, accessible only to the morally prepared and the disciplined initiate. This core is identical across cultures. Amonis, Pythagoras, Buddha, Christ, the Egyptian priests all taught the same thing. What differs is only the exoteric wrapper, the public cult, the moral and social instruction for the masses. The esoteric teaching itself, the knowledge that the infinite can be experienced through ecstasy, through samadhi, through the liberation of consciousness from the finite self, remains constant. This is a stunning rhetorical move because it allows Blavatsky to claim continuity with authority while explaining away any contradictions. Where Buddhism and Christianity appear to differ, it is only in their exoteric teaching. At the esoteric level, they are identical. Where modern theosophy appears novel, it is merely recovering what Maimonides, Plotinus, and the Neoplatonists already knew. The argument about secrecy is equally strategic. Blavatsky preempts the obvious objection: if this teaching is so old and so true, why is there so little textual evidence for it? Answer: because it was deliberately hidden. Maimonides bound his pupils to silence. The Egyptian priests kept the mysteries restricted. Christ spoke only in parables to those outside. The Essenes had grades of initiation. Therefore, the absence of written record is not evidence of falsity, it is evidence of authenticity. The more hidden something is, the more esoteric it appears, the more credible its claim to preserve ancient wisdom becomes. This doctrine of perennial secrecy will echo through 20th century occultism. It becomes unfalsifiable. Any tradition that claims to possess secret teachings cannot be contradicted by the historical record because the historical record, by definition, does not contain the teachings. They are secret. What Blavatsky has also done, with considerable sophistication, is absorb and synthesize Neoplatonism, Hindu Vedanta, Buddhism, Kabbalah, and Christian mysticism into a single framework and then claim that framework is older than any of its component parts. She quotes Moscheim, Wilder, the Edinburgh Encyclopedia, all respectable authorities to lend weight to her reconstruction of Maimonides. She uses the language of Plotinus to describe samadhi. She cites Plato's meditation. She brings Christ's parables into alignment with Buddhist secrecy. The effect is syncretic architecture, the claim that beneath all these apparently different traditions runs a single wisdom religion, and that the modern Theosophical Society is the inheritor and spokesman of that unbroken line. Whether or not this is historically true and modern scholarship treats it skeptically, it is a masterwork of initiatic rhetoric. It tells the believer, you are not part of a new cult. You belong to something vastly older, attested by the greatest minds of antiquity, preserved in secret by saints and philosophers for 3,000 years, and now, finally, made available to you. Next, Arthur Edward Waite, The Holy Kabbalah, the Spitzen-Körper Thelema. If this archive serves you, support it on Patreon. Link in the description.